Hey, everybody, you have joined the Steel City Blitz Steelers Podcast. I'm coming at you live from unusually hot Portland, Oregon, which is really weird. It's going to be like 100 degrees tomorrow. Yeah, really weird. Joining me tonight, this is Ben, by the way. Joining me tonight are Ian and Steel Dad, who is joining us from a remote location somewhere in the wilds of Michigan. Where the heck are you?
I am in mid-Michigan, right along the Saginaw Bay is where I am located. And and by the way, don't forget, we are sponsored or presented by DEK Roofing Incorporated of South Florida.
Is that all you're going to say? That's just DEK Roofing? All right.
No,
Ian, how are things tonight?
Things are good. Pittsburgh's great.
Pittsburgh is good.
Other than the David DeCastro news, which has everyone a little bit down. But
yeah, dude. I mean, that is a little surprising. So on that note, let's just jump right into that. The Steelers today released 9-year pro David DeCastro, apparently still recovering from an ankle surgery he had prior to the 2020 season. And they are apparently intent upon replacing him with Trai Turner, who frankly last year was not good. Now, granted, he wasn't healthy all season, and they're obviously banking on the fact that if he's healthy now, he will return to form and become, that Pro Bowl guard that he once was. It's a 1-year prove-it deal. Don't know the financial terms. Tried to find out, didn't get them. It is what it is. I'm sure they'll come out in the next 3 days. But I'm betting it's incentive-laden, really low salary. I don't know how they're going to do that for performance, but probably games played, games dressed, games played. Ian, your initial reaction when you heard this news?
I have to say my initial reaction was that, I was kind of sad for DeCastro because he was the sort of last fixture on the offensive line. He was going to be the real veteran leader this year. And it's kind of the end of an era. I mean, you figure our whole starting line from 2 years ago is now gone. Villanueva's gone. Pouncey's gone. DeCastro's gone. Matt Filer's gone. It's all in an upheaval. But I mean, these are things that happen, over the course of being an NFL fan, that he gave us 9 very good years, or maybe you could say 8 very good years and 1 injury-plagued year where he battled probably as hard as he could and still made a Pro Bowl, which was probably more on name recognition than actual play because he was not as good last year. And really my first thought was, like, I hope he's okay because, his play definitely dropped off last year, although we talked a lot on this show about how we all thought he was playing through an injury and we hoped he was able to get back from it. And it just seems like he wasn't able to get back from the injury. Especially being released with a non-football injury designation, it just seems like whatever it was, either became a degenerative condition or just wasn't able to get back in football shape. He came to minicamp last week, but didn't really take part in any of the drills. So, hopefully, he's made a very good sum of money in his career, and hopefully he's able to go on and have a good life after his career if this is it for his NFL career. Can't really complain about getting 9 years, multiple All-Pros, multiple Pro Bowls out of a first-round pick. That's pretty much exactly what you hope for when you draft a guy in the first round.
I tend to agree with you. You want that guy that's going to get second or even a third contract, and I really thought he was going to get a third contract, but that was based upon the assumption that he was going to be healthy this season, and that did not come to fruition. And rumor has it that he's mulling his future. He's not sure if he's going to continue playing or not. Mark, what were you thinking about this? And more to the point, what do you think of Trai Turner?
Well, it's a typical Steelers move, in my opinion, because the Steelers like to find guys that are going to be cost effective, almost first and foremost at this particular position. He's coming off a year, as you noted in the opening, that was less than stellar, but there is a very nice resume, body of work in his early career. So I think the arrow is up as long as he's healthy. And I'll be honest, I don't know what else they would do right now. I don't know who else is on the market. I would have to look at that and say, who fits from a schematic standpoint, but also a financial standpoint. So good move to be prepared for it. I think when I heard the news today, I wasn't like stunned. It's still surprising because the guy has been just your classic Steeler the last 9 years. So it's always hard to say goodbye to those guys. But, based on last year and what we were hearing a little bit this year, I wasn't totally stunned. So still sad to see him go. And as Ian pointed out too, the O-line is completely new now. And I that is overwhelmingly my number one concern.
Including the coach.
Oh my God.
So it's a total unknown.
Yeah.
That does not mean they're going to suck. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying it's completely different.
Mm-hmm. No, it is. It's going to be very different. I really think this team is going to have a lot of time together in the preseason, or this unit rather. I know we would like to try
is we're playing in the Hall of Fame game, so we get an extra preseason game.
And as much as I hate it, injury always a factor. They need that time. This unit has to work together.
The thing that bothers me about that game is the field is infamously poor.
Oh yeah,
it just every year there are injuries on that damn field. And
was that Sean Squeezum that tore his ACL there?
Squeezum did that.
Squeezum did,
making a tackle.
Yeah, it was on that field.
He should have just let him go. Yeah. Yep. If you listen to this show regularly, you may recall that in early April, Ian brought up the curious pattern where the Steelers were bringing in guards, lots and lots and lot of guards. They were stockpiling them prior to camp.
Yeah. And it was
he wondered then if, I'm just going to paraphrase. Basically what Ian said was, I wonder if there isn't a problem with David DeCastro. And Mark and I, Steel Dad and I, both said, nah, he's fine. I haven't heard anything. This is no way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're just looking for depth. Well, it turns out Ian was right, and there was an issue with DeCastro.
For the record, I hate being right about this. Yeah. I hate being right about it. But really, I mean, if you look at going back to early April, I mean, look at the guys that they had signed in free agency. They brought in Joe Haig, who's more of a guard than a tackle. I mean, I guess he can play that swing role. They brought in BJ Finney, who's a center, but probably better at guard than center.
But he's not very good at guard either.
Right. And then the Rashad Coward from the Bears, who they signed, who's definitely a guard. So I mean, that's three guys who are more or less best suited at guard than any other position. Yeah. Plus, early April, that was when they were starting to, go out and scout draft prospects, and they were sending Adrian Clem to go scout guards a lot of the time in the draft. So it was like a lot of things were just kind of pointing to, I mean, we kind of figured Kevin Dotson should have been the presumed starter at left guard. If he wasn't, then there was probably something wrong with whatever internal analysis they were doing, because Dodson was better than Filer was there last year and should have played in that playoff game too. That being said, so then, the only question mark left is DeCastro, and I was just kind of like, is everything okay with him? I hope it is. And apparently he was just, body didn't recover from the injury, which, once you get over 30, you have surgeries, shit happens. It's just, you're not a young man anymore. It takes you longer.
Yeah, I tend to think you're right on that count. Mark, what do you think? What do you think of the guard competition going into camp? What's your general feeling? I mean, they've got a gaggle of guards they're going to play in there.
Guards. That's well said.
That a gaggle of guards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you call a group of guards? It is now.
I guess. I mean,
yeah.
even we didn't talk about Jaron Jones, or did you? Did you bring him up?
No, I didn't mention him. He was on the practice squad last year, right?
Yeah, and he's another one, and Gray is another one. Yet again, they keep him around because they like him. He's brutal. He's physical. They don't think he's a very good athlete, but they like Derwin Gray from the standpoint that he's a very good run blocker, like in a phone booth.
Right.
So
I tend to look at it like, okay, Dotson's going to start at left, and Trai Turner's going to start at right. I think Finney, obviously, we have said on this show multiple times that we like Finney much better at a guard position than we do if he has to play center. So if he does have to play guard, I think we're okay. Not in the best case scenario, but it's okay. And then you've just, as you said, you've got this massive group of other guys that are fighting for roster spots. And I have no idea how that's all going to shake out. Obviously, training camp injuries will take care of one or two of these guys. And it always happens. And then eventually you settle on it. Who goes to practice squad if they're eligible, who stays on the team because they have the ability to swing to other positions. So that's really what's going to end up, this whole thing boiling down to is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I'm not super excited. Even at I watched Trai Turner's tape, some of it a couple of weeks ago, because I wanted to kind of get a sense for where he was, and he was really underwhelming. I mean, I was like, okay, are we sure we want to bring this guy in? And yet here we are, and it's just it's a bet.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. It's a total gamble.
I just realized something. Derwin Gray left. He's not on the roster. He didn't resign.
Did he sign in Jacksonville?
He did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one other thing on DeCastro. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to watch it yet. Ramon Foster's show, I'll say, that he does with Dejan Kovacevic, with DK Pittsburgh Sports. It's available for free on YouTube. It's also in podcast form, but I watched it on YouTube. At any rate, they did a little segment today, this afternoon, on DeCastro being cut, and Foster brought up some very interesting points. He's a guy who's been in the room, been on the line with DeCastro, so I'd say he has probably better insight than most other just regular schmucks like us or beat reporters or whatever. But he said that he felt like when Mike Munchak was here, like DeCastro really liked playing for him. Munchak was a guy who could challenge DeCastro and really like get him honed in and focused. Obviously, Foster wasn't around the last couple years with Sean Surratt, but the sense I got was that Foster didn't think like DeCastro was like Surratt was really challenging DeCastro much and like motivating him a whole lot. And maybe you saw that a little bit in his play, but that he kind of lost a little bit of an edge or something like that. But it seemed like it sounded like DeCastro might have been a little bit bored, and now kind of going into the last year of his contract, coming off an injury, and having to learn a whole new blocking scheme with a new coach, like it wears on you mentally. And I think the other thing that doesn't get mentioned a lot is the last year with COVID and everything that happened was just incredibly difficult mentally on all these athletes. I mean, these guys had to live in hotels. They couldn't see their families. We talked last week on the show about the COVID restrictions for, guys who don't get vaccinated versus guys who do. And, you're not allowed to see your family. You're not allowed to eat with your teammates. You got to do you can't sit next to the guys in meetings. And, more than physically, just mentally, I think it wears on these guys, and especially these guys that are older veterans that have already made, tens of millions of dollars. Somewhere in the back of your head, you got to be thinking like, how much longer do I want to put up with this? And do I just want to retire and go spend time with my family and live my life however I want to? And, as I think Chuck Noll famously said, once you start thinking about retiring, you're basically retired already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben, what does the fact that they designated non-football related injury, what does that mean going forward here?
I honestly don't know. I mean, there are 1,000 different reasons they may have gone that way. They can't save any money by doing
Right.
it. DeCastro can file a claim regardless because he had surgery for an injury he got while playing. So he can file a claim and he can claim, I think he can collect like $1.5 million from the Steelers this year, regardless of the way he was released. So I'm really not sure. I honestly don't know. There must be some benefit to him or to them, but I don't know what it is. And it's just odd. It was an odd thing. I noticed that that was a designation on the release. Maybe it's because it was an old injury and it wasn't, from last season. It was from before that. Maybe he rehabbed himself between the end of the season and, now June, and he wasn't under their supervision. So as far as they were concerned, it was no longer a football injury because I don't know. I'm speculating. Right. I really don't understand why they would do it. Like I said, regardless, even if the league tried to say, no, this is a non-football injury, we're not going to pay you out that $1.5 million, he can very easily prove that it was a football injury and that he had the surgery and he just never recovered. Sean Sweesom collected 2 years partial salary, 2 years worth of partial salary from the Steelers when he left. And there was really never a question that he was going to do it. Even though he'd made a lot of money, he had a special needs child and he needed to make as much as he possibly could and put it away. And so he did it. And, my understanding was the Steelers expected it all the way. And they were kind of like, yeah, we know you're going to do that. So just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think they're trying to screw DeCastro. I really just don't see it. It's just not in their character to try and do something like that. So it was just an odd thing to me when I looked at it. Derwin Gray, real quickly, I looked it up as we were talking about it. He was waived from the active roster in December, claimed by the Jags. I did not realize that. And then he signed he signed an exclusive rights free agent tender with them this spring. So it is what it is. He's gone. If they cut him, I imagine the Steelers would try and bring him back. But for right now, they can't. The Steelers announced.
That's another point, though, is we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we talked about what positions the Steelers might address. There are going to be a handful of guys that get cut, over the next couple months between now and the end of training camp. So this, as we sit here now, offensive line, I mean, they just signed Trai Turner, who's a veteran, and they have a habit of, letting the veterans kind of, start at the beginning of the year, especially. And as camp goes and other injuries may happen, bumps and bruises, whatever, they may sign additional guys too. So I'm not ready to push the panic button just yet, but if we start the season,
you pointed this out last week. They never thought that Joe Hayden would come available, and the week before the regular season, he does and signs in Pittsburgh. So you kind of don't know what's going to happen at this point. It would be great if a guard or tackle shook loose. But, the Steelers now have about $16 million in cap room before the Trai Turner contract. I don't know what he signed for. Again, my guess is small dollars with incentives based upon playing time, but I really have no idea. So let's just say hypothetically they have about $15 million in cap room to play with as of right now.
Take it down to 10 because they usually like to have about 4 to 5 to carry over into the year.
So 5 to play with. So they've got $10 million, let's call it disposable cap room, that they can either sign players with or they can carry over to next season, which they don't need much cap space next season. They're going to be fine.
Right. So until TJ Watt signs his contract.
Well, even then, I mean, I think Watt at this point, you can you can increase Watt's cap hit this season if you want to, but you don't have to. If it were me, again, I talk about this every time they do one of these, and they rarely do it exactly like this, but I'd make it cap neutral. I would make the cap hit pretty much what it's going to be right now, which is, about, what is it, 10.7? Yeah. 10.7. And, leave it at that. Don't change anything, push it all into future years. But they may go, we've got some space. Let's just go ahead and use it. They may also look at it from the standpoint that it's nice having that space in reserve in case something happens, not to mention the fact that you don't have to use it because you can carry it into next season. So it really doesn't make a heck of a lot of difference. TJ Watt's going to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
He'll have I imagine, a giant cap hit in 2022. Not such a giant one this year. But Watt's getting paid, no question. The Steelers announced today that they will not be holding training camp in St. Vincent College this year in Latrobe.
Mm-hmm.
Much to the dismay of many fans. The NFL obviously hates the Steelers. They've got it out for them. They try and screw them over. Everybody else, gets to have their training camp in remote spaces, but the Steelers can't. Well, Ian, you're a little closer to this than I am because you live in Pittsburgh.
I do.
What did you hear today?
I think amongst the fan base there was a lot of disappointment, but just from the logistical side of things, given all of the NFL's restrictions that they're putting in with all the COVID stuff, just what we talked about last week, right? With all the restrictions on players, you can't have dinner together if people aren't vaccinated and things like that. Like, St. Vincent's is a college. The dining halls are basically set up for everybody to eat together. Like, just being able to comply with whatever other rules the NFL might have was probably going to be pretty logistically difficult. And even, I don't know, requirements of like, okay, guys have to have separate bedrooms. You can't have a roommate anymore. Like, we always heard stories listening to like Tunch and Wolf and whoever about like, oh yeah, back in the day, we would go to these guys' rooms and, Tunch and Wolf roomed together for so many years and they brought a fridge and all this food and all this. Yeah. But like, if guys have to have their own rooms now you're talking about like more dorm space that you have to have available. Right. And, right. I looked at St. Vincent when I looked at colleges. I did not go there, but I looked at it. Some of the dorms were air conditioned, some of them weren't. So, it's just logistically, it gets very difficult versus, being able to have it in Pittsburgh, like at the South Side or at Heinz Field, is more of a controlled environment, and you can set up the facility that you own to then comply with whatever regulations the NFL wants to put into place. And the other thing to keep in mind too, as we've seen over the last, 15 months that this COVID thing's been happening, that regulations change on sometimes a daily or hourly basis, that you can put together a plan and be like, okay, this is how we're going to do this. And then some regulating body, whether it's the feds, the state, the county, whatever, says, oh no, you've got to, have this occupancy limit or abide by this restriction or do this differently. And then you've got to amend all your plans that you just came up with. So it's not easy, especially when you're in an environment that you don't own and control. So you figure, right, they basically rent St. Vincent College, the Steelers do, but St. Vincent's is still providing all of the cleaning crews, all the cafeteria workers, all the janitorial staff, all that stuff. And when you write these contracts for, okay, this is the number of cafeteria workers we need, this is the number of meals we need, this is the number of cleanings per day we need from the janitorial staff. If the NFL changes that between now and then like it all gets thrown for a loop. Whereas those things are much easier to control when it's in a facility that you own, because you can just say, okay, this is our facility, this is how we're going to do it. So it sucks for the fans, but like, I also kind of understand why, and it wasn't the Steelers' fault either. The NFL was the ones that said no, and it may have just been that logistical stuff.
Yeah, I mean the NFL didn't approve their plan, but you hit the nail on the head before when you said you need to have a controlled environment. And a lot of the issue with the college is just that there are so many ways onto the campus. There's so many different ways to get on. They've got to hire the state police and a private security firm to keep people from sneaking on to the campus through the cemetery during training camp.
This is true.
They don't have a choice but to do that. And there are a bunch of other ways that you can walk on to the campus because it's wide open, where with a lot of other larger colleges, it's a little bit more controlled environments. You can have a complex that's walled in where you can set up a controlled environment there. St. Vincent isn't set up that way. You don't have a compound or a complex where it's fenced or walled in. And yeah, maybe they could have gone out and gotten fencing. I don't know, something along those lines. I mean, they set up fences around the fields for training camp, but they're not setting up for the entire campus. And with COVID restrictions in place, they were going to have to eliminate all field passes anyway.
Yep.
And I got this from somebody who works at the college. Field passes were eliminated. Autograph alley was already eliminated. Lining the path on the way to the field was already eliminated. The restrictions that they put in place basically would have kept the players in their rooms, in the dorms, or practicing, nothing else. The players would have had to stay not just in the new Rooney halls, Rooney, I don't know, the dorm the Steelers built there, the new one. They built a new one there that is very nice and it's all air conditioned. They would have had to stay in two other dorms that were built as quote unquote temporary dorms in the 60s because there was a fire that burned down a lot of the campus in the early 60s. And those dorms are still not air conditioned 100% in 100% of the rooms. So it would have been a mess. The players would have been uncomfortable. The plan was to have camp there for a couple of weeks and then send them back to Pittsburgh after that. So it would have been abbreviated camp anyway. They had to bring in a cleaning and custodial staff that was completely vaccinated and was tested. They would have had to test everybody that was coming into contact with the Steelers. The cafeteria is under construction right now. The weight rooms are tiny. It just wasn't working out. The Steelers want to have it there, and I think the Steelers were the ones that were really kind of trying to drive it and try to make it happen somehow, some way. You know, we need to put in extra money, we will, But it just became a logistical nightmare, and it got to the point where the college just couldn't coordinate and make adequate arrangements to satisfy these NFL requirements. And it's not like the NFL was being unreasonable about this at this point. I mean, all the other teams have got to meet these same qualifications. It's just, it was difficult to do in that particular environment. So this isn't about the NFL hating on the Steelers. And as Mark pointed out before, actually in an article he wrote today, I'm sure the Steelers players are much happier because they get to go home and sleep in their own beds every night. Yeah. You'd like to see them in that environment. Oh, there was one other thing I was told today. The press was not going to be allowed to be on the field during training camp this year either. So, they would all be behind the fences, away from the players, maintaining distance. I guess they'd have their own little space, but they'd be behind fences just like everybody else. And having to report on it that way, having to do interviews at greater than 6 feet. just a mess, man. And I know that as Steelers fans, we all, and I'm not going to exempt myself from this point, we all tend to overreact to things like this because, we live we live our football. And, we were all collectively disappointed. I was planning on flying out there this year because if I ever do drag my ass out there for training camp, I can get field passes from my friend. And I was like, yeah, this is the year. And about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was looking at airline tickets and I almost pulled the trigger. So glad I didn't, because that would have sucked.
Yeah, we were in the same boat. We were talking about going over there. We haven't been in a few years to training camp, and I was thinking the same thing, lodging, all that kind of stuff, and I'm grateful I did not pull the trigger either. But this whole thing is clearly good for the players in that respect. They don't have to haul stuff back and forth, and they just have that comfortability with the South Side or Heinz Field, and so at least for this year. But I fully expect we'll be back to St. Vincent in 2022. At least I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I hope for the same. I guess we'll find out. But I would expect that in the future they will be back whenever that future is. I don't know. Anyway, getting back to the offensive line, I want to talk about something real quickly because it's something I've noticed repeatedly since the draft. Fans seem to be really fixated on the wealth of skill position players that the Steelers have on offense, even with a quarterback in the twilight of his career. And let's face it, that's where Ben is. And that's not to say that Ben is not a capable NFL starter. He is. He still is. But it seems to me that we're overlooking that key component to every offense, and that is the foundation for that unit in the offensive line. Mark, what's your comfort level with the offensive line as a whole right now?
The word comfort does not apply. I just have no comfort right now. You're talking about potentially a rookie starting at center. You're talking about a very inexperienced guy starting at right tackle and Banner. You're talking about a guy in Chukwuekorfor starting at left tackle that still has significant question marks. I mean, honestly, the best position I feel good about is probably left guard with Kevin Dotson, a second-year player. I mean, that's where I'm at. But that all that said, that doesn't mean they can't excel and they can't become a good unit. I said this a couple weeks ago. I said, if you go back and look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they were 7-5. Brady wasn't playing all that well. And you can pretty much point to the fact that offensive line was not playing well. And when they started to play better is when everybody else started to play better. So I don't care how many great skill position people you have on this Steelers roster. If you can't block both in the passing game and the running game, those people mean nothing. So, yeah, I got no comfort right now as we sit here in late June.
Well, I don't feel quite that strongly about it, but I agree with you from the standpoint that I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered before we can decide this is going to be a good unit or a bad unit. And I'm not just going to be one of these people that'll say, yeah, they're going to be fine. They're going to be great. Adrian Clem's going to whip these guys into shape. Ian, you haven't really addressed this much. What's your feeling on this?
So 2 things I'll say. First, to your first point about people focusing on the skill positions, it's because those are the ones that score you fantasy points. And as much as I hate to admit it, offensive lines don't score people fantasy points, and offensive lines don't really help you in Madden. And unfortunately for us, the generation younger than us cares a lot more about those things than we do. All right. That being said, we're all old and crotchety. Let me have another drink of whiskey and get off my lawn. Yeah. All right. All that being said, I've said this the last couple weeks, and I'll say it again, that I don't I don't think this is a good offensive line as it stands right now, but what I want to see out of them is progress. I want to see them be better in December than they are in August. I'm not expecting them to, be the recent Dallas Cowboys, even mid-90s Dallas Cowboys. I mean, that was a heck of an offensive line.
And I
even
think
the
I
recent
think that,
Steelers lines, that I'm not expecting that. It's
better in December than they are in August is a very fair expectation. I agree with you.
Yeah, I would say I want to see them be better in December than August. And the other thing is, I want to see consistency in the starting lineup. If you look across the league, the teams that tend to have the most success are the ones that use the fewest offensive line combinations throughout the year. And some of that's just getting lucky with injuries. But the most successful teams tend to be the ones that are able to, just use a handful of different offensive line combinations throughout the year, because people are going to get hurt. We've got a 17th game this year. There's going to be guys that miss time with injury. It's going to happen. But, the fewer combinations we have, that means the more often these guys are getting to play together. And since this is basically a brand new unit from 2 years ago, essentially a brand new unit from last year, because Okorafor is even moving from right to left. So that's a whole different position for him. So basically a brand new unit across the board, that they just need snaps together. They need that experience. They need time. They need to build. There's going to be mistakes along the way. There's going to be hiccups, but I want to see progress, and I want to see them have the chance to build that together as a unit and hopefully build something good.
I agree with you from that standpoint. I think that if they can be a kind of a middling unit this year, that'll be okay. And if they get better as the year goes on, I'm not saying I'll be excited by it, but I would be satisfied with it. It is an entirely new unit, a new coach, everything else, a new scheme. I don't know what to expect, honestly. I do think, and I talked about this before, I do think that Harris will help them with his style, with his running style. He's decisive, but he's patient and he's smart and he has great vision. He really is, and I talked about this before, he really is a Ferrari as a running back. He's as good as it gets from a talent and durability standpoint. From a power standpoint, he doesn't have great breakaway speed, but he cuts very well. He's going to get you an extra couple, 3 yards after contact. I think Freiermuth's going to help too, because frankly, you can't block any worse than Eric Ebron was last season. You just can't. So if you got Eric Ebron in line and you substitute him with Pat Freiermuth, even if Freiermuth just gets in the way, he's doing a better job than Ebron did last year.
Yeah, true. Actually, so here's something else I want to bring up too. So obviously we all know the Steelers finished dead last in the league last year in rushing, in yards per game, yards per attempt, all that, dead last. Someone on Twitter last week posted a very good chart that had not only yards per rush, but yards before contact and yards after contact. And obviously the Steelers were dead last total. They were also next to last in yards before contact at just 1.9 yards before contact per rush.
But it gets worse. Go on, Ian.
The only team worse than them at yards before contact was Tampa Bay at 1.8. So just
Let's
a tenth
talk about
of a yard.
yards after contact.
But also, yes, that's the thing, is the yards after contact were also like third worst, basically. They were at 1.7 after contact. So, and Tampa Bay won the Super Bowl having the worst yards before contact, but they were also one of the best teams at yards after contact, at like 2.3 yards after contact. So you don't have to do both of them great. Like Baltimore and Tennessee were kind of the top of the pack. You just have to do one of them really good. And I think Najee Harris helps he helps the yards after contact, and he may even help the yards before contact a little bit. I mean, I said back in the day with Le'Veon Bell, like his rookie year, his second year, he was the best back I'd seen us have in a long time. And I'm just talking about Steelers backs now, but the best Steelers back in a long time at turning a potential 2-yard loss into like a 2-yard gain, and those 4 yards make a massive difference.
Huge.
There's yeah. So, and I think Najee Harris's foot
there were
speed
times
has
that,
some similar abilities.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And there were times that Bell would turn a potential loss into a 5-yard gain or a 40-yard gain, and it was just like, whoa. I mean, if you get a 10-yard swing on a play where you should have lost 2 or 3 and you gain 7. That's massive. It's huge. And I completely agree with everything that Ian just said about Harris. He is going to be that kind of player. And look back at last season. If you watch film, and, we watched a lot of film last year. It got disgusted with the running game. But there were some holes that our running backs missed. It just holes would open up, and they ignored them and went the other way. Benny Snell, it's really frustrating, really, really frustrating. But Anthony McFarland too, and he's the kind of guy. If McFarland can ever hit the hole correctly and get into the open, he's a home run hitter. That guy's got breakaway speed. Jalen Samuels is trying to play himself out of the league, so we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
But
I don't remember someone I was listening to on the radio basically said that they. Like Anthony McFarland really would have benefited from like having an actual training camp in preseason last year. That they're expecting basically him to take a big step forward this year with actually having like an off-season program to work through. I'm sure a number of players would have benefited a great deal by actually having a preseason.
And we've talked about the fact that younger players aren't getting a fair shake because of the practice limitations in the preseason now. Unless you're a high draft pick or unless you've been drafted, teams aren't necessarily going to invest the number of reps in you that they should. And practice limitations are set such that it makes it really difficult for undrafted guys to stand out and make teams. And last year was even worse because of the fact that there really was no preseason. And there was this kind of abbreviated quote unquote camp last year. Yeah. And it hurt guys a lot. That's why when I talked about it on this show, when Cam Hayward was talking about how guys should stay away from off-season workouts, I was like, no way, man. Absolutely not. Especially if you're a young guy, you should definitely go in there, sit down with your coaches, pick their brains, get some coaching, let them coach you up, work out in the facility. If you get hurt, they got to pay you, all of that, all those advantages, take advantage of them, use your resources. Don't be stupid. And this year, I would imagine that a lot of the rookies from last season, McFarland included, are going to take bigger jumps than you would ordinarily expect from year 1 to year 2 because of the fact that last year they kind of had to learn on the job. I completely agree with the point that he made.
Yeah, I do too. I think so.
Well, gentlemen, I guess we should remind the audience that we are sponsored by DEK Roofing of South Florida for all your commercial, residential, and multifamily needs. Contact DEK Roofing today.
Well done.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, and you can go to DEKRoofing.com to set those appointments up. Get free estimates.
Yeah. Very, very nice.
Before we depart here, I do have a question for you guys. I saw this popped up on Twitter, and I immediately had that kind of like, I don't know face.
Still fearing myself.
Well, be careful. Is DeCastro a Hall of Famer?
No.
Okay.
It's really hard for offensive linemen to get in. I mean, look how long it took Alan Faneca to get in. Yes. And Faneca had a better career than DeCastro did. I mean,
Fanico
DeCastro was really darn good. Don't get me wrong. He'll be in the Steelers Hall of Honor, but it's really hard for linemen to get in.
Fanico was the best guard in football for 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it took him this long to get in. And guys that weren't as good as Fanico, frankly, that were not as good, got in before he did, which I still think is total horse shit.
Yeah, Kevin Mawai.
Yeah, for example, that's just one. Yes. Fanico had more All-Pros. He had more Pro Bowls. He had more postseason awards than any of those guys, and he had to wait. Total horse shit. He also has a Super Bowl ring. Again, total horse shit. One of the best plays in Super Bowl history, that 75-yard run, longest run from scrimmage ever, Willie Parker. That was all Fanico. Fanico comes around the corner and bang. And look at that gaping hole. And the only guy who could have caught him was Michael Boulware, and he whiffed. And Willie was off to the races.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think it was
there are a bunch of people. There are a bunch of people. Next stop Canton, blah, blah, blah. I saw that all over. I was just like, and I know Steelers fans, we love our Steelers, and we want to pump them up, and it's the same thing with the Hines Ward argument that I have with people all the time. He's never getting in either. That doesn't mean these guys didn't have great careers.
Right.
People need to get past the fact that if you don't make the Hall of Fame, it doesn't mean you weren't a great player. It just means, you didn't make the Hall of Fame. And that's another standard above and beyond that. I mean, if there's a guy who is viewed as the very best at his position at some point in his career, he's going to make the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Among the very best anyway. I mean, Jerome Bettis, I guess you could say that Jerome in his era was the best big back. But was he the best pure running back? No, but he got in regardless.
Well, that's the other thing to keep in mind too, that, I mean, we discussed this when Bill Cowher got in, that, we weren't really sure if Bill Cowher was, quote unquote, one of the best head coaches of all time or a Hall of Fame coach. But I mean, he also kind of got in with a special class. So the Hall of Fame does do these, 75th anniversary special classes, things like that. So there are, other possibilities beyond the normal route to get in. So, I mean, it's possible at some point DeCastro gets in, but I just think, I mean, he had a couple All-Pros, he had a lot of Pro Bowls, but it's really hard for offensive linemen to get recognition.
Yes, I agree.
It is what it is. Yeah. I at this point anyway, he's not. If DeCastro somehow gets healthy and continues his career elsewhere and regains his playing form, then maybe he might. And if all that happens and he does get healthy and regain his form, the Steelers are obviously going to regret having released him. But they obviously don't think that's going to be the case, or they would not have done so. That's really it. And on that note, we will sign off for the evening. Thanks again for listening. You have a minute today, think about the Baltimore Sky Rats and hate on them.
Because they suck.
Because they suck. Bunch of fucking assholes. And we'll talk to you again next week. Signing off for Mark and Ian, this is Ben. Have a good night.
Go Steelers.
Ravens.